Hello, and thank you for watching, and thanks for the new subs. Colosseum has a very interesting amount of history back behind it. The people who organized the Roman games came up with some strange ideas. The weirdest of one of them was probably a device called the Patria. This was a gigantic seesaw that could lift people about 15 feet into the air. Criminals were brought out naked with their hands tied behind their back. They were placed on the massive seesaws where they could bounce back and forth into the sky like kids on the playground. Then wild animals were also released while they're on the seesaws. Animals couldn't reach the person on the top of the seesaw, so the criminals would desperately try to bounce the other person to the ground. Animals released into the Colosseum didn't come neatly out of the cages. They would surprise you, hopping out of the ground beneath your feet without a moment's notice. The Colosseum was littered with trapdoors, powered by a system of 24 lifts. These lifts were designed to carry about 600 pounds. Because of that, they had to lift massive wild predators to the surface. Lions, wolves, leopards, bears were all put into these things, ready to jump out at the condemned people above. It took about 8 men to turn the wooden shaft that brought the animals out, and they also had to do it perfectly. If things didn't go as planned, the unfortunate technician was thrown into the Colosseum with the criminals, and they would fight for their lives, of course. Emperor Commodus was a big fan of the games. Swept up by his love of the sport, he would waltz into the arena himself, usually naked, and fight for the amusement of his people. Most of the time, the naked emperor, of course, would slaughter exotic animals like lions, ostriches, hippos, elephants, and giraffes in front of the crowd. And it was also, the crowd was required to applaud. I'm curious if they had the applaud signs like today. Other times, he would fight people, although he wouldn't kill them in the arena itself. He let them surrender. In private, though, Commodus murdered people for practice, getting ready for the game. Disgusted, his people plotted against him. In the bath one day, Commodus met a fitting end, strangled to death naked by a wrestler trainer. While Commodus was in power, it wasn't just criminals who got sent to their deaths. Unfortunately, cripples and dwarfs were as well. Commodus once gathered up every dwarf he could find and dragged them off to the Colosseum, such as if it was Christmas Day and Santa was out for you. Each one of them given a meat cleaver and set loose for the amusement of the crowd, forced to fight until the last man. Another time, Commodus gathered up people who had lost their feet to disease and had them tied up to a row in the center of the arena. The emperor himself came out, walked down the line, bashing in their heads with a club. The myths of ancient Rome would be played out for an audience. These weren't literally works performed by actors. Of course, they were massacres, with criminals playing in the roles of the doomed. One show played out the torture of Prometheus. By having a criminal nailed to a cross with his stomach cut open. A bear was then released to finish him off. Another criminal thought he got out easy, cast as Orpheus, taming the beast. He was sent in with a lyre in order to play it for an arena full of animals. These were tame animals that wouldn't hurt him at first. Watching a man walk around not getting murdered was too boring for the Roman audiences. So they actually thought of another plan. From the source material a bit. Halfway through the show, a starved bear was sent out to kill Orpheus. The games were the best places to see animals during that time frame. A lot of people did not have zoos, but they did have the Colosseum. First giraffe ever set foot in Europe was actually displayed there. It had been captured by Julius Caesar and was dragged into the arena with a chain around its neck. So just showing off animals wasn't enough. Exotic animals, including elephants, rhinos, hippos, and giraffes, were pitted against one another in combat. Other times, hunters would be set loose to slaughter the animals as well, for the amusement of the crowd. According to one source, Nero managed to get an elephant to walk on a tightrope for the delight of the audience. Although, we don't know for sure the technical details of how his people pulled it off. But so many animals from so many places were brought in that it created its own ecosystem. At least 684 unique species of plants have actually been found there, birthed from dropping in animals from every corner of the globe. In 281 AD, Emperor Probus had his people plant trees in the Circus Maximus until it looked like a forest. Then he invited the city to the circus for the event that would never be matched. Instead of being stuck sitting in the bleachers, the people were invited to walk into the arena itself. There, a horde of herbivores was let loose. 1,000 ostriches, 1,000 stags, and also 1,000 boars were released into the crowd, along with a scattered slew of whatever animals that they had on hand. The entire audience was allowed to run wild with the animals, free to hunt them in any way they choose, and they could take home whatever they killed, sort of like a grocery store from back then. It wasn't always men who were sent into the arena. Of course, women were also there as well. One show started with a woman dressed as Venus standing before an emperor, Titus, declaring it is not enough that a warrior Mars serves you in the unconquered arms. Venus herself serves you too. This was more than just a ceremony. It was a signal to the audience. Today, they wouldn't just see men beating each other senselessly. No, they would actually see women kill each other too. Titus's brother was really into the idea. When he took over, he had more women fight than any other emperor. Unlike the men, these women were usually untrained, beating each other into the pit against dwarfs in a savage, desperate battle. What sense of shame can be found in the women's wearing a helmet? One Roman wrote, who shuns femininity and loves brute force. There are about 4 confirmed times in history when the Colosseum was filled with water to stage a full-scale naval battle. These were incredible technical displays, of course, crewed by condemned prisoners. Full fleets of ships were put inside and would battle for the amusement of the crowds. The first was staged by Julius Caesar, and it included 4,000 oarsmen and also 2,000 fighters aboard full-size ships. It was so popular that people were trampled to death trying to get a good view. That was just a small show though. They got bigger and bigger until Claudius set the record by having 100 ships and 19,000 soldiers fight in the massive artificial sea. His show almost didn't happen though. At first, the prisoners aboard the ship refused to fight. Claudius sent in his imperial guards to demonstrate exactly what would happen to the prisoners if they didn't die, for the entertainment of his audiences. Prisoners weren't too happy about being sent to death for the amusement of the Roman people. For many, going through these horrors was a fate worse than death, and some did everything they could to end their lives before they were forced on stage. The night before they were to face the arena, one group of 29 Saxon prisoners took turns strangling one another to death, which was believed to be a mercy compared to the horrors of the Roman games. Another prisoner shoved his head between the spokes of a spinning cart wheel to snap his own neck. Most extreme was a desperate German prisoner. With no other options, he grabbed the lavatory sponge from a toilet and thrust it down his throat, choking himself to death. The Romans just saw it as another great extension of the games. Upon finding about the death of this prisoner, the philosopher Seneca wrote, "What a brave fellow! He surely deserved to be allowed to choose his fate. How bravely he would have wielded a sword. What a sincere man." Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for enjoying. Hope you enjoy more videos in the future. Thanks for the likes and subscribes. Have a great one. Bye. Happy holidays with your family.